Everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for showing up to our work session at 6 p.m. So we've got a couple of items that we're going to talk about, and we certainly want to go ahead and jump right in and have a conversation. So the Garlic Festival intellectual property conveyance, and then the city manager job description code update in preparation for an ordinance. So, Bill, turn this over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening for this topic, we have Jason Onart on the screen, and I apologize if I still am not. If I got the last name correct, I think I got Jason's first name correct. So she's giving me a thumbs up, so that's wonderful. She is with BEH, and really kind of is the one in the office that has a bit more specialization and familiarity with intellectual property law. And so she has been involved in helping us on this particular issue. So before you this evening, I handed out on a table a draft agreement. And that draft agreement will be the topic of the first half of this work session. But basically, I did put a kind of a PowerPoint presentation together, assuming it's going to let me advance. Yeah. So the question before you all is the North Plains Event Association, which is the independent 501c6 nonprofit that operates the Elephant Garlic Festival and operates I'm not telling you anything you all don't know, but I'm just kind of framing the conversation here. And operates a variety of events by contract, all of that by two different contracts with the city of North Plains as an entity. And the North Plains Event Association has asked for city council to consider transferring and effectively returning intellectual property regarding the Elephant Garlic Festival back from the city to, in this case, the North Plains Event Association, the 501c6. There's a bit of history with this, and there's some reasoning behind it. But the bottom line is that right now, the Elephant Garlic Festival, its intellectual property, domain name, website domain names, logo, different trademarks, everything that kind of people generally associate with the Elephant Garlic Festival. Back in 2014, the Chamber of Commerce back at that time, North Plains Chamber of Commerce, was going through some turbulence transition, and it gave to the city all of the intellectual property for the Elephant Garlic Festival, all that stuff. Gave it to the city for what we should, can be called safekeeping. The city being a stable, permanent entity, even though the chamber was kind of going through some things to keep the Elephant Garlic Festival going and assured of being a thing, intellectual property was transferred from the chamber over to the city. And so right now the city actually owns intellectual property still regarding the Elephant Garlic Festival. Over time, though, even though in 2014 and a little bit later there was conveyance of intellectual property to the city of North Plains regarding the Elephant Garlic Festival, over time, quite a bit of it, almost all of it, its registration has actually expired in terms of being copyrighted, trademarked intellectual property. There are only two things remaining of intellectual property that are actively registered and owned by the city of North Plains. That's all that's left. Are those two domain names right there. The city owns OregonGarlicFestival.com and the city owns funstinks.com. But everything else in your agreement, in the draft agreement for consideration tonight, at the very end is an attachment, an Exhibit A. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And it details everything that was originally conveyed to the city, but then it kind of shows or says what is still owned by the city and what fell by the wayside and just needs to be re-registered by the North Plains Event Association as an entity rather than any kind of conveyance from the city. So all we have left for the city to consider as an entity in terms of transferring actively registered intellectual property for the Elephant Garlic Festival are those two websites. Website names, those domain names. So the draft agreement before you that we can discuss, and Asen can fill in all the blanks and elaborate as she has did all the kind of homework and checking into all of the different intellectual property that was originally conveyed to the city from the chamber. The agreement that you have before you would basically do two things. Number one, transfer ownership of the two active registered domain names for the Garlic Festival, OregonGarlicFestival.com and FunStinks.com. And then the agreement also, the city would relinquish claim to any other Garlic Festival intellectual property that may have not been registered, that kind of, fell to being unregistered. And therefore letting the North Plains Event Association go and on its own re-register that other intellectual property. And there's no conveyance for the city to do because it's not registered anymore. So the agreement states the city won't go and try to re-register all of that. Basically, the North Plains Event Association can re-register all of the other intellectual property that that expired, and the city wouldn't be involved in that. That's basically what this agreement in front of you does. So I will stop here, and I will let Asen be the expert on it that she is.
Bill, I think you summarized everything really well. The only couple of things I would add or highlight are, as you indicated, the agreement also transfers any sort of common law IP rights that may have arisen, that the city may have, as a result of its usage of these various, logos and names and so forth. So even though the majority of the IP is expired, we're also saying in the agreement, any common law rights the city has, those are also being transferred.
Any technical questions so far about any of that?
Why the desire to have it changed over?
Basically, a couple of things. We have two members of city council who are also leadership in NPEA. And while they've been on city council, things have been kept in safekeeping. The city's owned the IP while they've been here basically in office, and it's kind of been an act of the city partnering with NPEA and making sure that the event goes forward. But with those two individuals, their end of their term being the end of this year, there's no reason to kind of have it's deemed an okay time to go ahead and put the intellectual property back out to a nonprofit that would continue to run the event, is the bottom line. So to create clear boundary between city and NPEA or Garlic Festival intellectual property being owned by the nonprofit that runs the event, rather than the streets combined or crossed.
The two people are myself, I'm the secretary of the NPA and have been so since 2012.
Well, and I'm also involved in this. And the thing I'm gonna say is that I was the architect that made sure this got conveyed to the city for safekeeping. That wasn't intended to be forever. And I have concerns about the new regime going forward and whether or not we're going to have a festival. There's no promises. Tomorrow brings no promises. So I want to make sure that it's in the hands of the people who are equipped, have the wherewithal, have the financial support and the backing and the purse to carry this event forward in perpetuity.
What's next?
You have any questions?
No, I don't have anything, like it's in order. I don't question any of it. It's been well thought of. Somebody work, so.
So your question up there, Bill, does the intellectual property have value? And it says yes, but not determined.
Mhm.
I mean, if we're only talking domain names, what's the value of the domain name?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. Well, any domain name where you're basically owning where somebody accesses information to something has economic value that could be transacted. And so I have this slide up just to say that, just like any other domain name, there's some kind of value associated with owning that domain name and people going to your domain name to look up info. But at the same time, we don't know what the value is, and in the bullet points I have here, it's not likely that the value, if the question comes up for any of you, well, what's the value of this to transfer it over to the NPEA? We don't know. But reasonably speaking, there's not a ton of dollar value that you could have a capitalized value of these website names. They're website names. If the main thing is that the Elephant Garlic Festival was operated in a way that decided to rebrand, change location, do things differently, market differently, have different activities and orientation, whatever. The two domain names the city owns, their value could potentially change, go down, because the Garlic Festival is different, marketing itself differently, choosing try not to route people to those websites, but do things, market itself differently. All of those actions by the Elephant Garlic Festival would affect what value there is in having a domain name. That's all that is.
How much money does the city put into having these sites developed and built and maintained?
We don't. The city really doesn't do anything regarding the Elephant Garlic Festival other than it has,
the domain.
we house the domain, we own it. The city owns the registered domain, but we don't do anything with the website.
Did they build it or did the city build it or pay for upkeep fees or anything like that?
Only on the registration. And that was in 2015 was the last time. It's due for renewal before long.
Well, you need to remember that the city and the NPEA have an agreement in effect and have had an agreement in effect and have an agreement that begins in calendar year 25 for 5 years. So that brings up a couple questions for Asen on her notes in the comments. The first one was, yes, since 2014, that is correct. And the second note is, it's a question about the city having permission. The city will need permission, I believe, not that we wouldn't, if we need to construct that in the agreement, I think the city would need permission to use its trademarks going forward. I think that could be part of the agreement that we have in place already. I'd have to look at that agreement, though. I don't have that document.
I don't think the city has any inventory. The second part of her question, is there any inventory city needs to sell that would branded? I can barely read this without light.
No, the inventories,
That's
was
owned
owned.
by the NPA.
yeah, one time there was a list of things, but most of that stuff's been replaced. And that changes from time to time. There isn't anything of value there much. There's signs and things of that nature.
Right. And we were contractually obligated, Councilor Page, that NPA was contractually obligated to pay the city a base rate bus every year, which the MPA has done so. They pay that to the city.
Is there any consideration that needs to be given in order to transfer rights?
Any consideration to be given for transfer of it?
Yeah. If we have ownership, we have ownership to do with somebody else. Is there any consideration for that to make the contract will?
Is there any consideration for whether the city would transfer the rights to a different entity?
Right.
Not really. I mean, we have a binding agreement with the NPEA, that takes effect January 1. It's basically an extension with slight modifications, of the previous 5-year extension of the contract. And it's, NPEA is the exclusive operator of the North Plains Elephant Garlic Festival. The contract states in the recitals that the intellectual property is owned by the city.
Right. So this would be for Chris then. Chris, are we able to just transfer something like this over that has potential value
Certainly.
free of charge, or do we need to have consideration for that to get a binding contract?
But the contract, the consideration comes in many forms, right? And so in many agreements, you'll say in consideration of the mutual promises set forth herein, we promise to do this, you promise to do that. That's the consideration. In this case, although Aisen's been handling it, so I'll let her clarify anything I get wrong. My understanding is the NPEA's consideration is they're promising to use this to continue the Elephant Garlic Festival, which benefits the city and relieves the city of the burden of maintaining the domain and name and everything else. So there's no money trades hands, but that doesn't mean there's no consideration.
Okay.
Councilor Papen, what, if any, financial impacts will the city see if there's a transfer of ownership?
Well, the city doesn't receive anything. The city doesn't earn any revenue from owning the domain name. So really, nothing. Yeah, we don't, the domain name, not for this.
Okay.
The contract that the city has with the North Plains Event Association to operate the Elephant Garlic Festival, there is an annual payment. That they are contractually obligated to do every year to the city, but it's for operating the event. But there's nothing specifically related to revenue tied to any domain.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Smith?
I'm perfectly fine with this. If you are going into the details, but I'm fine with it.
Councilor Martinez, any questions? No. Okay. Jump along the bottom.
I do too.
I've already given my questions.
I don't have any questions on it.
Okay,
Next steps?
next steps on this particular item. We will bring back basically on the 16th, a resolution for you all to consider. Well, in the agenda packet, you'll get it before the 16th, but on the evening of December 16th, Monday, the resolution will be before you at the regular business meeting to consider and potentially adopt. That would endorse this agreement, this draft agreement, and authorize me to execute that agreement with the North Plains Event Association on behalf of the city.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Okay, 19 minutes. That was good. So the second part of this work session has to do with proposed amendments to the city code regarding the city manager job description that's in the city code. A proposed ordinance that makes that happen. And the changes to the ordinance, the red lines were in the agenda packet. So you've had the opportunity to see all that for a few days. So hopefully it wasn't, it's kind of buried, but it's in there. Okay, so here's the background. The question before you all for consideration is, shall city council amend city code pertaining to city manager powers and duties in sections 32.02 to 32.05 of the city code. So here's the background. The city manager position is actually found, defined, and elaborated upon in both the city charter and in city code. In the city charter, it's section 34. And in the city code, it's section 32, under officials and employees. The issue is this. Section 32 in the city code was last amended in 1999, and it shows. It's a very long, elaborate list of duties, much of it elaborating in a way that's really redundant to what the charter says the city manager should be doing. There's quite a bit of it in section 32 currently from 1999 that states the city manager should be doing it. But over time, we've grown and we've added staff that are specialized and educated in doing those things. I think the big example is planning. The 1999 city code states that the city manager is responsible for all land use planning in the city. Well, in 1999, when there wasn't far less going on day to day, the city manager could be the city planner at the same time. That's no longer feasible. And there's a few other things, and I'll get to that. And then in section 32 currently, since 1999, there's a surety bond requirement of a city manager to assure the city of duties being done without a risk to the city. And it's fixed at $25,000. And the recommendation of the attorney, Heather Martin, who's affiliated with BEH, who reviewed and put together proposed language here, stated that rather than fixing a dollar amount in code, allow an appropriate insurer to give an idea of what a surety bond value should be, instead of a specific fixed amount in code. So those are the two issues that proposed ordinance in your agenda packet would change. So it's small, and I apologize for the size of the text, but I wanted to get it all on one page. This is actually section 34 of the city charter, going over everything that the city manager must do, his or her powers, his or her duties and responsibilities. Oops, I went too far. It's quite a bit. There's 11 different items here, everything from attending all city council meetings, unless excused by mayor or council, to administering city utilities and property, encouraging regional and intergovernmental cooperation, delegating duties that the city manager, him or herself, cannot do or shouldn't be doing, but is responsible for subordinates in their performance of doing those things. I mean, it's a list and it's comprehensive, and this is actually very, very similar to other cities' charter regarding city manager duties. And they're written in a way that are actually over time flexible. I mean, none of these tasks for the most part have changed. And that point number 11, delegate duties, covers a lot of things as a city evolves and grows, where, for instance, a city manager can't be the city planner also. It just isn't feasible anymore, among other things. So here's the current section 32 of the city code that elaborates on the job duties of the city manager as laid out in the city charter. Now, forgive all the color coding, but I wanted to just kind of illustrate some things. Number one, everything, so this is the code that is up for discussion to amend. Everything highlighted in yellow is redundant to or elaborates upon redundantly what's already in the charter for what the city manager is supposed to be doing. All of those things are extra verbiage for what already exists. Everything highlighted in blue are roles that the city's grown, and specialized educated staff do those things. The city manager used to be the planner. The city manager at one point probably was also, like other very small cities, the city recorder. The city manager was doing a lot of different things day to day that now, as we have grown and grow, the city manager is supervising those more specialized, experienced people doing those things rather than doing those things him or herself. And then everything in green falls under is very specific, oddly specific, something very specific to 1999 when this code was previously amended. But everything in green are duties that are very specific and fall under point 10 in the charter, perform other duties as directed by the council. It just so happens that in the current version of the code, two of those things are laid out very specifically in the code. But of course, the charter trumps the code in terms of power and authority. So the bottom line here is that all of the city code job description is kind of extremely wrought iron, given what's already in the charter describing what the city manager is supposed to do. And all this kind of came about in basically in working on a proposed and then eventually executed contract between the mayor and I when that was negotiated with Heather Martin, the attorney's help, as she went through and looked at everything and looked at the charter versus what is in the code. It was identified that the changes would be appropriate. And so that's what this is. So what you have in your agenda packet is the proposed action that I lay out here. Number one, it removes all of the elaborate, sometimes redundant and sometimes a bit in conflict code language, and simply refers the job description in code to the charter. So all of those specific duties laid out there that are mostly already in the charter or are redundant to the charter aspects of it. All those things are redlined, redacted, and replaced with basically a reference to the powers and responsibilities of city manager are as laid out in the city charter, section 34. And then the proposed ordinance, the code language proposed that you have in your agenda packet also removes the fixed $25,000 surety bond value, doesn't make it a permanently specific number, and allows for that to be flexibly changed over time depending on insurance industry recommendations. So that's the issue. And that's what you have in your agenda packet, all the red lines in that proposed ordinance, changing the code. It looks sort of like, if you look at it, it looks like the section 32 of the code is being just deleted completely. Well, all the specifics are being removed, and it's what's simply being left is a reference to the city manager's job is as outlined, laid out in the charter. So it basically just says the charter is the job description for the city manager. And it's less specific and less fixed in time regarding duties, that sort of thing. I mean, every time when the city grows and all of a sudden this and this happens, you don't necessarily want to be constantly, each time having to update your code if you're trying to stay on top of it. That's what you're trying to avoid here. But the charter itself is written, I don't want it sounds cheesy, but it's timeless in terms of how it's written. It's still very valid in all this language. So there is that before you.
At what point do we identify a surety bond?
ASAP.
And is there a recommendation for an amount?
That would be obtained by me calling SAFE Corporation and getting their opinion of what would be appropriate, because my own personal rate credit score is involved in some other things.
Mhm.
So it's pretty much just an insurance policy on me in case I make any drastic financial mistake for the city. That's most of what that is. Okay, so it really kind of depends on information about me. And that would be me going to SAFE and getting a quote.
Okay. Do you need direction or consensus to make that happen? Or
Well, I mean, right now, if I call them, I have to get a surety bond of $25,000. They might say, oh my gosh, that was $1,999. It needs to be $35,000. Or they might say, your credit rating is fantastic. It only needs to be $15,000. So, but right now, all I can do is call, without this changing, all I can do is call and get a quote for a $25,000 surety bond.
Okay,
There's no exceptions because it's so specific in the code.
council, any questions for Bill?
Counselor Smith.
I'm looking at the vacancy one. It said that any vacancy in the office of the city manager should be to the extent possibly filled within 60 days after the effective date of such vacancy. Is that just a? It takes a lot longer than 60 days. The process review for 6 months.
There was an allowance of up to 6 months for this recruitment process. Frankly though, once it got going in August. I mean, like, half of the 6 months was just working on and specifying what you wanted in the city manager, then the consultant turning that into a profile of the job, an advertisement for it, getting the word out. Once that happened in early August, it was early August until mid-October. So that part of the process was a little under 3 months. But I hear you.
Should it be specified in there differently or?
I mean, it doesn't say must be done in 3 months. It says if at all possible,
To the extent possible.
to the extent possible.
Right. I just thought maybe if you just had like 90 days instead of 60.
Certainly can.
Yeah.
If that's of interest.
I think the word, is it up there? I mean, I don't know what we have online.
No, I don't have the proposed, actually, it's in the agenda.
What we have online is filed and not filled.
It's in the code.
But it's in the code.
Okay.
3204. Item for bond.
Are you're looking in the packet itself? Yeah.
Oh, I just went out on the code online.
Well, we can note amendments easily.
Yep.
Any vacancy should be. Filed.
Did you
So-
find it?
So basically fix the typo and 90 days?
Yeah, I think I'd say,
90?
yes, comes you.
I don't see a
I don't
problem with
see that.
60, honestly.
Either
I would
or, it
make
doesn't
it a
matter.
lesser period of time. That doesn't mean you're gonna complete the process in that amount of time. That just means you're gonna make sure it's filed. That the vacancy gets out there, that it's the advertisement, that you get those things in motion. Because it's arguably going to be somewhere between 4 and 6 months to negotiate.
And it could be filled with an interim. I mean, it's not very high.
Yeah, I like a short amount of time.
That's fine.
This is the urgency issue.
It's just not easy to fill in 60 days.
Well, that's gonna, it has to be filled. Saying that, when I read this, fill means there should be somebody sitting in a seat, interim or whatever, right?
Any other comments or questions on this revision? No? Councilor Campbell?
I'm stick with 60.
No, I think it just cleans it up.
It definitely cleans it up.
Yep.
Okay.
I appreciate Heather Martin's eyes on it when we were going through that process, so that's great. All right. Nothing else?
Nothing else.
Then nothing else.
34 minutes on both
We
of
have-
those.
25 minutes?
Would you all drink a lot of coffee right before the meeting?
All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and close our work session and then it's 6:35. All right. We'll be back in 25 minutes.